abruptly hang up your live, okay?
Okay.
I abruptly hang up your live, okay?
She just abruptly hung up. So we
Okay.
are live. Welcome back. So for those of you who are joining us from Facebook Live, we have had to make a leap over to YouTube, and it will be posted on Facebook shortly on how to get to the link for you to join us live here
Hi.
on YouTube
Welcome
instead.
back. So for those of you who are
And
joining
there's an
us
instant playback happening, so just bear with us. We have been having all kinds of
to
awkward and weird tech
and-
issues this evening, which has been quite unfortunate, but we soldier on. So thank you for hanging tight. Thank you for tuning in, and hello and welcome to our final Ward 3 movie night and discussion for the month of May. I hope that you've had a chance to have your dinner, tuck in your little ones, and hopefully your older ones are with you tonight and joining us for this conversation. I'm super excited to, one, for us to watch this short video together, and two, more importantly, have a conversation together as a community about the topic of economic recovery and the intersect that needs to be part of our everyday conversation in our communities, but most importantly, in making decisions moving forward about what a recovery means and what it needs to look like from an equitable and sustainable perspective, and to make sure that we're leaving nobody behind. First, I want to acknowledge before we go any further that we are here in Hamilton, gathering virtually upon the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, and Mississaugas of the New Credit, that this land is governed by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabeg to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. And to me, as a settler, it is a reminder that I have a role and responsibility to play in the sacred work of protecting our air, water, and land, that I can't simply passively benefit from access, that I have a role to play, and a deeper role to play in terms of understanding my role as a settler in decolonizing. And so 3 core principles for me around the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant is to take what I need, to be mindful of leaving enough for others, and to clean up after myself. And very much for me, these 3 principles integrate into the conversation that we're going to be having tonight about a just recovery, one that leaves nobody behind. So this pandemic has exposed and laid bare how poorly the status quo before times was failing to meet the health and well-being of the planet and our people. While we all continue to do our part to limit and contain the transmission of the COVID-19 virus and continue to do our part to flatten the curve, we're also beginning to enter an era of turning our attention to conversations about how to reopen and how to recover. But the priority in these conversations to date has been placed on recovering the economy. We're not robustly envisioning nor democratically engaged in a conversation about recovering our society. I believe that our focus right now needs to be on a recovery plan that is rooted in achieving a healthy, equitable, sustainable society and economy that leaves nobody behind. We can't shirk away from our responsibility, especially as elected representatives, even on city councils, and especially on city councils across this country, to address the reality and the complexity of this pandemic and what it has laid bare. These are truly unprecedented times that we're all facing collectively, and that those who have been benefiting from the status quo pre-COVID, who are pushing for reopening and the economy, must really truly hear loud and clear that for the sake of our grandparents, for the sake of our grandchildren, and for the sake of future generations, we simply cannot accept the status quo of what the norm used to be. It wasn't good enough, it left people behind, it was harmful, and we deserve a better society, and we can build it together. And so on that note, let me take a moment to introduce our 2 special guests tonight, both of these fierce women have been dedicated to expanding this conversation in their own organizations, in the communities where they live, but also nationally. We're joined tonight by Katie Perfit of 350 Canada and Maya Menezes. Menezes of The Leap to discuss the work that they've been doing to mobilize us all towards a better world. So Maya is the Senior Manager of Programming and Development at The Leap and works directly with people mobilizing for change in their communities by crafting stories that make transformative change real for people. She works at the intersections of migrant justice, the abolition of borders, racism, and climate justice in her unpaid work with No One Is Illegal, Toronto, and Close Camps Coalition, and as a climate justice intervener at UNFCCC. Welcome, Maya. Katie Perfit is the national organizer with 350.org based in Ottawa on the Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. She spends her time between supporting Indigenous-led resistance to extractive industries and communities organizing for a Green New Deal, and on the land with her dogs in a rural community that she grew up in. Welcome, Katie. So before we get going, tonight what we're going to do, now that we've had to switch over to different platforms, is take a moment to watch a film that was recently launched pre-COVID in the United States. It was presented by The Intercept and Naomi Klein, and it's narrated by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It's written by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Avi Lewis, and stunningly illustrated by Molly Crabapple. If you want to read more about the film's inception, there's a link to the article by Naomi Klein in the event page on Facebook. And A Message from the Future is the short film that we'll be watching tonight, which literally paints a picture about the future that we can create with a bold vision and a course correction. This is especially relevant as we feel our whole world has shifted and we look towards a recovery from this pandemic. So tonight, as you watch this short film with us tonight, I want you to think about a few things. Take a moment to pause and reflect on what kind of silver linings you and your household have been experiencing in this pandemic. What have been the silver linings showing up in your neighborhood and in your community? What are the ways in which we've truly come together and come through for each other? What matters most to you right now as you've been spending more time while also required to do all the heavy lifting of all the other things and that you're responsible for? What does the future that you want to create look like? And how can we change it and achieve it together? So with no further ado, we will switch over and enjoy this film together. And afterwards, come back and have a great conversation.
The bullet train from New York to DC. It always brings me back to when I first started making this commute. In 2019, I was a freshman in the most diverse Congress in history. Up to that point, it was a critical time. I'll never forget the children in our community. They were so inspired to see this new class of politicians who reflected them, navigating the halls of power. It's often said, you can't be what you can't see. And for the first time, they saw themselves. I think there was something similar with the Green New Deal. We knew that we needed to save the planet and that we had all the technology to do it, but people were scared. They said it was too big, too fast, not practical. I think that's because they just couldn't picture it yet. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with how we got here. 1977, New York. A senior scientist named James Black made a presentation about how burning fossil fuels could eventually lead to global temperatures rising 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Within 2 years, one of the world's biggest supertankers was outfitted with a state-of-the-art lab to measure CO2 in the ocean, gathering more data about global warming. Guess who was doing all of this research? ExxonMobil, the oil and gas company. Oh yeah, Exxon knew this whole time, as did our politicians. 10 years later, James Hansen, NASA's top climate scientist, told Congress he was 99% certain that global warming was happening and caused by humans. That was 1988, the year before I was even born. So did Exxon listen to the science, including their own? Did they change business models, invest in renewables? No, the opposite. They knew and they doubled down. They and others spent millions setting up a network of lobby groups and think tanks to create doubt and denial about climate change. It was an effort designed to attack and dispute the very kind of science they themselves had been doing. And it worked. Politicians went to bat for fossil fuels, and these massive corporations kept digging and mining, drilling and fracking like there was no tomorrow. America became the biggest producer and consumer of oil in the world. Fossil fuel companies made hundreds of billions, while the public paid the lion's share to clean up their disasters. We lost a generation of time we'll never get back. Entire species will never get back. Natural wonders gone forever. And in 2017, Hurricane Maria destroyed the place where my family was from, Puerto Rico. It was like a climate bomb. It took as many American lives as 9/11. And in the next year, when I was elected to Congress, the world's leading climate scientists declared another emergency. They told us that we had 12 years left to cut our emissions in half, or hundreds of millions of people would be more likely to face food and water shortages, poverty, and death. 12 years to change everything. How we got around, how we fed ourselves, how we made our stuff, how we lived and worked, everything. The only way to do it was to transform our economy, which we already knew was broken, since the vast majority of wealth was going to just a small handful of people, and most folks were falling further and further behind. It was a true turning point. Lots of people gave up. They said we were doomed. But some of us remembered that as a nation, we'd been in peril before. The Great Depression, World War II. We knew from our history how to pull together to overcome impossible odds. And at the very least, we owed it to our children to try. The wave began when Democrats took back the House in 2018, and then the Senate and the White House in 2020, and launched the decade of the Green New Deal, a flurry of legislation that kicked off our social and ecological transformation to save the planet. It was the kind of swing for the fence ambition we needed. Finally, we were entertaining solutions on the scale of the crises we faced without leaving anyone behind. That included Medicare for All, the most popular social program in American history. We also introduced the Federal Jobs Guarantee, a public option including dignified living wages for work. Funnily enough, the biggest problem in those early years was a labor shortage. We were building a national smart grid, retrofitting every building in America, putting trains like this one all across the country. We needed more workers. That group of kids from my neighborhood were right in the middle of it all, especially this one girl, Ileana. Her first job out of college was with AmeriCorps Climate, restoring wetlands and bayous in coastal Louisiana. Most of her friends were in her union, including some oil workers in transition. They took apart old pipelines and got to work planting mangroves with the same salary and benefits. Of course, when it came to healing the land, we had huge gaps in our knowledge. Luckily, Indigenous communities offered generational expertise to help guide the way. Ileana got restless, tried her hand as a solar plant engineer for a while, but eventually made her career in raising the next generation as part of the Universal Child Care Initiative. As it turns out, caring for others is valuable, low-carbon work. And we started paying real money to folks like teachers, domestic workers, and home health aides. Those were years of massive change, and not all of it was good. When Hurricane Sheldon hit southern Florida, parts of Miami went underwater for the last time. But as we battled the floods, fires, and droughts, we knew how lucky we were to have started acting when we did. And we didn't just change the infrastructure, we changed how we did things. We became a society that was not only modern and wealthy, but dignified and humane too. By committing to universal rights like healthcare and meaningful work for all, we stop being so scared of the future. We stop being scared of each other, and we found our shared purpose. Ileana heard the call too, and in 2028, she ran for office in the first cycle of publicly funded election campaigns. And now she occupies the seat that I once held. I couldn't be more proud of her, a true child of the Green New Deal. When I think back to my first term in Congress, riding that old school Amtrak in 2019, all of this was still ahead of us. And the first big step was just closing our eyes and imagining it. We can be whatever we have the courage to see.
Welcome back. So I don't know how many times I've seen that before. How about the two of you?
I've watched it so many times.
A lot of times, yes.
And I feel like every time I'm having like, am I lofty here? Am I too lofty here? Is this the right conversation at this level? I always kind of like come back to that along with some of my key touchstones that keep me grounded in life around the values. And just to unpack it a bit, I'm a first-time city councilor who was elected on the values that I ran for, which fundamentally were about empowering residents to have a say, a direct say in the decisions that were being made around our city council table. That we knew at that time during that campaign that we were facing a housing crisis, that our streets were not designed to facilitate a safe community, that we had systemic issues that had been neglected for decades, that we had a north end of our ward here where the accumulative impact of do anything you want industrial regulations and zoning allowed for. And generationally speaking, we've got a life expectancy rate that is a decade, if not longer, shorter than the rest of the city of Hamilton. Some of our residents have a life expectancy of 20 years less than Hamiltonians that live in a different zip code within, or different postal code within our city. And so when you grow up in a neighborhood like Ward 3, or you grow up kind of aware that this is the context and this is your reality, and for this long things have not shifted or changed, I take to heart that I got elected on the things that I campaigned on. And one thing that I've been really principled about in sitting in this seat is that we need to see government make decisions based on values. And this time more than ever, facing a pandemic, facing something that has just absolutely shook the foundation of our households, of our society, of our community, of our economy, of our healthcare system, and exposed those who've been made vulnerable systemically and those who have been particularly vulnerable due to the symptoms of this virus, that we have a calling right now from the future that says, how are we going to respond right now? And the decisions that we're making right now are heavy. They are complex, and the reality that we're facing is layered, as multiple crises seem to be layering on top of each other inside the context of this pandemic. So the big takeaway for me every time I watch that is that last banner, that last image, that last visual of this beautiful dreamed community that's green, that's thriving, that's multimodal, that sees people thriving, and the banner that we can be whatever we imagine. And so, yeah, thank you both for joining me in this space of imagining, and wanted to flip over to the two of you about what are the key takeaways for you about that film, or that little short video. And yeah, what do you think? What do you think matters most right now? Katie or Maya?
No, Kate, go, Katie.
Yeah, I can go first. Thank you, Nurinder, for setting up this conversation. And just want to say a big kudos to all the elected leaders that are really pushing right now. There's, yeah, like you said, there are some pretty powerful forces out there that are trying to take advantage of this crisis for their gain. And I think without elected folks who are really accountable to their communities and to social movements, we could be in a much worse off place. So I just want to say thank you for using your power in a way that really uplifts and benefits the people that you're most accountable to. I think, yeah, I mean, every day I'm having different reflections. I don't know about everyone who's watching, but this period of time has given me a lot of time to really sink into my own thoughts. And it's been interesting for me being relocating during the crisis to be living rurally, and just seeing how the fallout of this has really lifted the veil on some of the ways that our economic system, in particular, what I'm paying attention to right now is our food systems, especially as I'm like basically surrounded by farmland. And so many of the people I know in this region are farmers, and just how the conglomeration of our food industry has really marginalized people who grow our food, and has made our food system a lot less resilient. This community that I grew up in is the one that, my family settled here generations ago, and we have a family of farmers, and the way that their own practices have had to shift because of the pressures of big industry have meant that they're in a really precarious position right now. But at the same time, even before this crisis started, there's definitely been a resurgence and relocalization of food systems. And in this crisis, those have been the ones that have been most resilient and that have been like providing some of the most critical services to our community. It's not been the big grocery chains or the like beef that we're not getting from Alberta, whatever it may be. It's the local folks who are making sure we have food on our tables. And I'm interested to hear what Maya has to say about this, but that's definitely been something that I've really been reflecting on. And I think there's just such a huge opportunity right now to turn our attention back to the local people in our communities who, have been marginalized through austerity, and but who are the people who really are taking care of our communities and want to be the ones taking care of our communities. So that's what I'm thinking about right now.
Awesome. Maya.
Thank you. And Nurinder, I want to second Katie's comment. Thank you so much for hosting series like this. It's important and connecting. It's nice to see people's faces, see what are in people's houses. I'm a big snoop, so I'm really enjoying seeing people chatting to me in their rooms. Yeah, I mean, I've gotten the privilege to see that video a billion times, obviously because Avi did it with AOC, but I like to show it so much when I go to places where we're talking about what it means to have the power to see ourselves in the future. We're in such truly end times, it feels like. It really does feel like we're living through a certain level of the apocalypse, that it's so difficult to even see ourselves. It's so difficult to see ourselves surviving, but it's much more difficult to see a world in which we thrive. And that's the thing I love the most about this video. For me, what I've been thinking about a lot lately is what community means. I think in a lot of ways, what Katie's saying about, this crisis has truly lifted the veil about how bad things have been for so many people. But what has really just driven the message home for me is that for so many people, before was already crisis.
Yeah.
All we're in now is that everyone else is also in crisis, and everything that was bad is much worse. So I've been thinking a lot about what are the ways that we can actually envision ourselves in a world in which we thrive. And I think that for me has been embodied in the growth of mutual aid networks. And it's something I've been thinking a lot about, because of course, if we're talking to people about what it would mean to divest from fossil fuels, or to divest from carceral politics, or to divest from capitalist machines and mechanisms, and to see people as whole and see people as valuable, and envision a world in which everyone is not only treated with dignity, but is seen as essential, then that really challenges us to invest instead in alternative systems. And I think that mutual aid networks in a lot of ways have showcased this in a very tangible human way. Mutual aid also, of course, is political, deeply, deeply political. The roots of mutual aid come from disability justice advocates who have been talking about this for generations. I mean, the calls that disability justice advocates have been screaming at the top of their lungs for many, many years. Suddenly, when able-bodied, upper middle class white people are like, I wish I could watch a movie at home with my friends, we're like, oh, done, it can happen. I wish I could have pharmaceuticals delivered to my door, done, it can happen. So the thing that I keep thinking about is that we can never go back, and we're better for it. And so creating the community systems that exist to allow people to grow their food locally, as Katie's saying, to go directly to farmers, the ways that we can make sure that we support each other. And if we're divesting from all of these very deeply harmful systems, what are the systems that we're building to replace them with, that are grounded in community and care and respect and dignity? So that for me is like a thing that becomes very clear in that video, is people are talking about how they're supporting each other, how alternative systems are not just something that are on the horizon, but we fully have the capacity to build. And so the way that I've been thinking about it is that care work is climate work. We've always known that investments in every piece of public service that involves the caring for of community, whether that is teachers or healthcare providers, construction in so many different ways, elder care, all of these things are care work, low carbon, often gendered work. And so, yeah, thinking a lot about those things, how we divest in all levels of society and put power back in the hands of people.
Thank you both for sharing your reflections. So something that that residents have asked me about is how could we envision, and what does, whether it's a just recovery, whether it's a healthy recovery that is guided by a desire for equitable and more sustainable outcomes that leaves nobody behind. One, what is that? And how does that intersect from your perspective and the work that you all have been doing in not only building movement, but helping shift and expand the dialogue and get it on the table for communities on that hyperlocal level, but also at a national level to influence where our governments are right now? How do you see that intersecting on a city level? So I guess that's a loaded question. One is around what is just recovery? What does that mean? And should the economy remain separate from the deep work that needs to be done to unpack the social impacts and this kind of desire for many people to keep society, keep people, keep the social issues, keep the environmental issues, and keep the economic issues separate? Why are they interconnected?
I can take the lead on this one, although it's a very loaded question. There's a lot there. I think what's interesting, and something you said, Maya, really sparked me to remember this, is that there was this poll done by ECOS, which, polling, it is what it is, but I actually thought the results were pretty incredible. And I will, I'll put the article from Press Progress in the Facebook event afterwards, but basically what it said was that 3/4 of people in Canada don't believe that we're going to go back to the way things were before the crisis. And they want us to, and they expect that we will move towards a society that focuses more on health and well-being. So when I think about your question in terms of, what does that mean at a national level, but what does that mean at a local level as well? And yeah, just like the ways that people are really showing up for each other in this moment is that I think in a lot of ways, I think people deeply understand that there is something wrong. And it's being like, it's on people's doorsteps. You know, this crisis is impacting so many people very intimately that I think people have been shook awake if they haven't been paying attention, and are being forced really to decide where they stand on a lot of issues that maybe they haven't been forced to think about. And so, what this polling says is that people are inclined to say we need to be investing more in our health and well-being, in the social services that protect our communities. And so I think this can play out in a lot of different ways, both at the local level, at the national level, regional, whatever it might be. And I think that what it comes down to is like community organizing and making sure that we're uniting behind like broad ideas that can really move the dial towards this vision that so many people actually have and are expecting. But it won't happen unless we're organizing together. So, and it won't happen unless we're organizing on many fronts and doing it in a way that is, you know, uniting folks who have been doing disability justice work, who are absolutely being undermined in this moment by our politicians, uniting with folks who are doing climate justice work, who are doing migrant rights work. All of these pieces are so interconnected. And yeah, to me, it's when we can really unite and really see the ways that we can intervene at local levels and higher levels of government is how we're going to move towards what we're seeing in the AOC video. And I don't know, Maya, if you want to share more about like the just recovery principles, I can pass it to you, but happy to take that on as well.
Why don't you do the just recovery principles?
Sure. Okay, cool. Yeah. So, I mean, and I think people are naturally coming to the table in this moment because there's just, this thing is so big. And so many people are seeing the ways that they're connected to other social movements and other issues. And so what's emerged has been this kind of, it's an emerging alliance, I want to call it. I'm getting a lot of Star Wars vibes from everyone who's coming together. But there's this Just Recovery Alliance that is forming, and it's going to be launching out into the world early next week. And if you're part of an organization, community group, you'll be able to sign on to be a part of this effort. And it really is an effort of tons of different kinds of organizations and community groups. And basically what we're uniting behind is a set of principles. And I'm going to copy them and paste them over into the YouTube chat. I hope it works. Okay, it's in a paragraph form, but I can post a better version of it on the event. But basically, oh man, it's not gonna work, is it? What is with technology today?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to read it out and then I will post it over into the Facebook group later on. But the principles are: 1, put people's health and well-being first, no exceptions. 2, strengthen the social safety net and provide relief directly to people. Prioritize the needs of workers and communities, build resilience to prevent future crises, build solidarity and equality across communities, generations, and borders, and of course, uphold Indigenous rights and work in partnership with Indigenous peoples. And so you can see that it's not necessarily policy prescriptions, but that when I think about even just the first principle is put people's health and well-being first, I'm just thinking about all the ways, from whether it's a municipal lens or a federal lens, that principle applies to. And so it has the possibility of uniting hundreds, if not thousands, of different organizations under this banner, and really provide a banner that we can all unite behind to push for that transformative future that we know is actually so vital, and that we have the opportunity to win in this moment.
Absolutely. And so I think one of the key things there around those principles is this idea that it's not about being prescriptive, right? That there is a unity around the broad principles and the values. And that leaves so much room for all the ways in which the responses and solutions need to be responsive to either a hyper-localized reality, a provincial reality, a national level reality, a regional reality. The truth of the matter is that that's the way it's going to need to go forward, right? That the evolving of our solutions needs to be based in addressing needs. And that can only possibly take place if we're doing the work of unpacking what has been exposed and what the needs have been. Maya, your thoughts or reflections around this idea of, some people feel like banding behind loose, right? Like the naysayers, loose principles versus coming up with real tangible solutions is a shortcoming of this movement coming afoot. And that what we really need in this time are tangible solutions. So what are your thoughts? Where do you think we need to be right now, and how do you respond to folks who are trying to limit the vision and the breadth of understanding that many people are providing to the complexity and the magnitude of this crisis, which actually does require us to think in these ways that interweave solutions, but also says this for here and not necessarily there.
Yeah, well, I think asking for the world right now is critically important. So I think the first thing we saw when billions of dollars seemingly fell from the sky that never existed before, there wasn't enough money to pay for all of these essential services that we needed. Suddenly there is. It means that, poverty, inequity, the solutions that cities can put forward, and the strength of communities, all of these, things they told us were not real and impossible and completely without our reach were completely manufactured and totally false. And for once in this really exciting moment, everything is on the table. And we would be remiss not to fight for the whole sky at once. And there's spaciousness for that. And in fact, it only helps to embolden the demands of others and to pull people into a vision of the future that is holistic. And can uplift everybody at once if we do that. So it's only helpful. I think that, right now, the power of community is so incredibly strong. People are building relationships with each other. As Mia Mingus says, you need to have very strong relationships in order to encourage people in your community to take risks, in order for there to be trust enough to take risks. And so having those relationships and forging relationships in your neighborhood, in your ward, in your city, is the perfect place to start fighting for demands that affect everybody. We know that the most progressive environmental policies start at the city and filter up once people have built people power behind it and built movement power behind it. So I think that's incredibly, incredibly important. There's so many ways that we can really connect all of the really beautiful interconnected tissue that builds our society by going first into community, whether that's where you're shopping for your food or the migrant communities that are involved in providing you a million different types of access to services, to where people are getting the care that they need. So I think we're in this really important political moment where social movements from a lot of different walks, and that's really encapsulated well, I think, in the Just Recovery Principles and in the makeup of the people that have come together to write this, from very different places that might not in any other circumstance have come together around a shared set of values, are doing so because it is not only the right thing to do, it's highly strategic. And so if people don't see that and are not, if people feel like a naysayer, you only have to look about what's happening all over the world. People are demanding very holistic, whole systems changing policies, starting at cities and moving up. So I think if people are naysaying, it's not because of what the data is telling us. Yeah.
I would just add to say that I don't think like municipal leaders or anyone who's acting at a very local level is in a position not to demand big. I'm just thinking about all the ways that municipal governments and their budgets have been so squeezed, and the pressure that puts on municipal services, especially when something like this, like COVID hits. I was just what came to mind is, when, Ford government cuts emergency responder funding and conservation authority funding. And I was really, when COVID hit, I was terrified for the community that my mother lives in. It's in the Outaouais, Ottawa Valley region, which was totally underwater last year. And I was just thinking about how rural people, when people without vehicles, without another place to stay, what would have happened if it flooded again this year? And I feel relief in that there isn't something like that here. But then you look all over the world, and that those things are happening to people right now. And yeah, it's the local governments that are facing such a burden. And so I think what you're calling for is the absolute responsible thing to do, to say we need more, we deserve more. And I think it's the responsibility of councillors to be, even though it might seem like it's not in your realm, it absolutely is in your wheelhouse. So yeah, again, just kudos that you're doing this.
Yeah, no, 100%. And so like it's been an interesting time here because and like everywhere else, where so much of our focus as a public realm has been on managing the crisis, right? Managing the health crisis, and this kind of, so much energy and attention and resources is going towards making sure that this virus doesn't spread. Everybody's focus is hypering in, tunneling into this narrow scope of this one result, or aiming to achieve this one thing, versus tapping into the reality of what people are facing right now, right? So I don't know if the two of you know this, but there was a retirement home here in Ward 3, the Roslyn Residence, that had the largest outbreak in Southern Ontario, that put not only all of the residents at risk, and the COVID had been positive tested for COVID, but also all the workers. And this comes 4 weeks after public health had walked in and did an assessment of the facility and provided them with a blueprint of what was required to take care of the people who live there. And what it exposed, and I think it's really helpful to just look at one scenario, right, and unpack how it went down the way it went down, what it has exposed, and what it demands moving forward. And so the operator, one, gross negligence, right, to risk the health and well-being of the residents whom you are in a contractual agreement because they pay for the services, they pay for the space that they live in, that you aren't even able to provide the basics of the service contract, the transactional relationship of that, let alone putting all of the workers, the frontline workers in the facility at risk, all of their families subsequently at risk, all of the communities in which those workers have had to go get their groceries or go attend to their essential services, literally putting the health and well-being of our entire city at risk by not following through on the guidelines that were put forward to them and handed to them as a blueprint. And so, what has it exposed? It exposes what happens when we neglect an entire segment of our population and hand over the complexity of care to private interests. And what is exposed is the need for the reliance on the public purse, right? Fundamentally, at the end of the day, to make sure that those residents were cared for and that those workers were cared for. We had to literally take everybody out of the residents and take them into our health sector, into the hospitals and into our health sciences here in the ward and across the city, to make sure that their well-being was taken care of. And so when you unpack just that one example, it not only exposes the cracks of the Band-Aid solutions that our society has become accustomed to kind of, accepting as that's just the way things are. versus the point, Maya, that you had made earlier about the things that folks who've been living with disabilities have been calling for decades, that if we center the needs of those who are most impacted and design systems around those needs, then we're actually capable of designing systems and responses that meet everybody's needs. And the potential then of what does future look like for elder care? What does this moment demand for the future of elder care? I can only imagine the anxiety that our aging population is facing right now as they approach having to make the decision about staying at home or being cared for by somebody else. And so, yeah, I'm digressing a little bit, but I think, the question about how do we become the society that is not only modern and wealthy, but dignified and humane too, from that short video, I think the question is for us to look at things fulsomely, right? And unpack every situation that's occurring in our neighborhoods and have the courage to face the truth of the matter. Any other thoughts? We're not going to be able to field any questions from our audience because we had to switch platforms, but any other thoughts that either of you two want to offer or share at this time?
Yeah, sure. And closing thoughts are, first of all, thank you so much for having us on, Narendra. It's really, really nice to talk about these issues, rant about these issues with people. I think something that I'm drawn to, and I'm watching, radical counselors like yourself and others who are coming to use their platform to bring people together and have these conversations and make the solutions real and remind people that we have a choice to make. I'm just reminded so much about the fact that like our collective memory, I think, is so incredibly short. We obviously, like when I see people praising people like Mayor Tory in Toronto, where I live, or Doug Ford, I just want to like, because we're in this crisis, of course, not just because of a virus, but because we gutted every social institution within barely an inch of functionality. We are in a crisis about hospital beds because there are not enough hospital beds, not because the hospital beds just disappear into Narnia, but because they were destroyed systematically at every single level of government. And we're in a crisis in our elder care homes, not because there are just no more elder care homes, because we privatize them and we put the well-being and the care of an entire generation of people in the hands of people whose primary concern is money. And so when I think about like the role we have to play in cities, like it's people think this is bad. Wait till climate change hits.
Right.
It's going to be infinitely worse. And so the thing that I think we must learn from this whole experience, Arundhati Roy says, the pandemic is a portal. We have the opportunity to step into this new world and leave a lot of things behind and take a lot of new ideals that have always been there and bring them into life. Is that we can build these solutions and safety nets and dignity of people to live well and happily into the world we're moving into. If we don't offer corporations massive bailouts, we could just give people checks so they could stay home. What is the economy? If people have the resources that they need to stay home and live their lives, we have invested inherently in society, foundationally in society. So yeah, we have a lot of choices to make about the world we want to build, for who and on whose terms. And with everything up for grabs, it would be very silly and a massive injustice to ourselves, to our neighbors, and to future generations, not to make choices that prioritize everybody's needs, because we have a lot to lose, but we have way more to gain by just taking some initial brave first steps. I won't rant too long.
No, I'm so here for the rants all the time. And so in this time of conversation and witnessing with some of our neighbors who are joining us virtually, one of the other things before I pass it over to you, Katie, is this idea or notion that the moment that we're in right now also is clarifying the generational shift in yeah, in values, in ethos, in priorities, in courage, and recalibrating what is political, recalibrating what is a demand, recalibrating and moving away from the quote unquote name calling and camping of people into these boxes and labels, i.e., bringing this kind of rigor and conversation that places the needs of our people and the environment to the forefront was historically and systemically and purposefully viewed as being radical by those who were benefiting from the way in which society was structured pre-COVID and in terms of a capitalist structure. And so in this time where we have this confluence of generations of people who've experienced a lifetime, whether it's a lifetime of coping and merely existing in this society and accumulating whatever power or wealth that they're able to pass on to their next generation, versus a generation that's demanding a seat at the table and providing a vision and a path that says we are capable of uniting. If we focus on these broad visions, we can come up with the solutions, and this like fierce invitation and encouraging of people to just break out of the need to know the answer and instead dive into the unknown and dive into the realm of possibility together to restructure and come out on another side. And so, prior to this, these conversations are often deemed as being adversarial, or that it's one versus the other, and this like really kind of polarizing and binary constructs of discussion and dialogue. And one of the things that often comes up in our community is don't make things too political, or that's ideological, or that's dogmatic, or that is about taking somebody else's blueprint, i.e., the conversation about the Green New Deal in the United States and trying to create a cookie cutter version of it for Canada. And I know I keep bringing up the naysayer's voice, but like this is the reality of the tension in this moment as well. And so as much as so many of us are trying to fiercely open up and invite people into this conversation, there is this constant like closing of doors that's also happening at the exact same time. And I'm just curious about how do you guys cope in that, and how do you navigate in those moments, and how do we facilitate a multi-generational shift together?
Yeah, that's such a good point. It reminds me of some conversations that I've been having with my uncle, who's been stopping by to help out on the farm just outside, and it feels like I think my uncle is a really good example of the ways that people's minds are really shifting in this moment. He goes from saying conservative tropes like we're spending too much money. How are we going to pay for all this? To I can't believe we privatized long-term care facilities and we need them to be in public hands again. And I think people, I think people are really in this position where we're struggling between the world that we've been told must be and the world that we know we need. And so I think for me, one of the most powerful things and most brave things we can do is continue to open the door and have those conversations as people are deciding where they land in this time and what they want to see about the future. And I think it's a really amazing time to be propositional. Like, what does it look like for us to heal from this? What do we want to leave behind? What do we need to see more of? What are the things that have been made possible by this crisis that we never dreamed would be a reality that, we want to keep now, whether it be free transit or whatever else, guaranteed income, and the like. So for me, that bravery is really about having those conversations. And I don't know, I'm just speaking for myself here, but I've never felt so connected to even my neighbors in the unit that I live in the city. Normally, I'm here in the country, but I've never felt more connected to them and more like in an alliance with them than in this moment. And the same thing goes for my neighbors here, where my mom lives out in the country, and a lot of them are family. I've never had such really meaningful conversations with family members as I've had in this moment. And so I think where we are in this point in time where, yeah, people are, their positions on political issues are so in flux, it's the absolute essential time to be talking to your friends and family and neighbors and coworkers, and asking them to be involved. And I would just take this a bit further to say, and we'll definitely talk a little bit more about this, but my team at 350 Canada has been able to build a framework for having conversations, whether it's with like your neighbors and friends and families, or your people in your workplace or whatever it might be, to be able to have conversations about what a just recovery looks like. And so I want to put a challenge out to everyone who's on this call to make the decision to have those conversations and to follow through on them, and to connect with local organizing that's already happening in your community. I think that's a really important thing that both of you have brought up, is that a lot of the big dreams that have been things that people have been calling for so long, and we finally have this window to make it possible. So let's talk to each other and let's connect with the local grassroots groups that are doing this work, and make sure that when we come out of this, we've expanded our reach tenfold, and have the people power to really flip this world on its head.
Awesome. So a couple of notes for folks who are joining us from Ward 3 here in Hamilton. So a few of the topics that we covered off in the conversation speak to the how, right? So if you feel ignited with the spirit of community in your neighborhood, there's so many ways in which you can contribute and support your neighbors. Many of you have already been doing a critical job of showing up for each other, whether you've been volunteering with Caremongering Hamilton, whether you've been part of the mutual aid network here in the downtown east side, whether you are joining us with our yard share program here in Ward 3, where we're sharecropping together. Those who have excess land and space are cultivating and growing food for neighbors down the block who need a couple extra, like a little bit more food security. In that, when we do focus in a realm that is within our control and within our means to respond to, so many beautiful things are possible. And if at the very least, what comes out of the next few weeks together as we brace through the opening up of our society and our communities, is that we are more deeply connected to each other, much more aware of each other's needs, and much more responsive to each other, that is a critical piece of the next steps, right? And the only secure community is an organized one, and many people are doing that right now, out of necessity and out of a deep understanding of everything that everybody is facing together. Before we go, I wanted to hear from both of you. How can Ward 3 residents here in Hamilton connect to the incredible work that both of you are connected to in the organizations that you're here representing, 350 and the LEAP? So Maya, you want to start us off?
Yeah, definitely. So you can follow the work we're doing at the LEAP on our website, theleap.org. So we, in response to the crisis that we're in, have put together a project called the People's Bailout, obviously seeing that the bailout was moving very quickly for, surprise, corporations and wealthy elites and not human beings. So what we've been doing is we've been aggregating demands that have been coming from community groups across the country and putting them into a 3-part framing. The first is relief. To relieve people, offer people relief in ways that will have material impacts on their lives right now and save lives. Respond, which is about, oh no, and I'm melding into Katie's because we both have 3-stage programs. So the 3 are basically like 3 phases of action. The first, getting people what they need right away. The second is actually thinking about how we're going to remake our society by creating institutions that are people owned, that are owned by communities, that serve people where they are. And the third, Reimagine, is about making sure that we have the spaciousness to actually look at our system and go, we can rebuild all of this from the ground up for everybody. So there's a set of demands on there. We've started with 3: housing, healthcare, and income support. And if you go to the bottom of the page, there will be resources to all of the communities whose calls to action were aggregated there. So you can be directed to the work that they're doing on the ground right now. We're going to be releasing more portions of the People's Bailout, but we're also going to be following up with a lot of public education materials, ways that you can engage with your family and friends, explainer videos. We're going to be hosting a lot of webinars and already have. And you can also tune into the podcast that Avi Lewis and I co-host together called Change Everything, which you can download wherever you get podcasts. Yeah.
Thank you. Katie, how can folks connect to the work of 350?
Yeah, just want to give an extra woot woot to all the work that the Leap does. I was just listening to the latest episode of the Changes Everything podcast today. So good. So all of the things that they're doing. Yeah, we also have a 3R respond, recover, rebuild. I feel like they're basically one and the same, and we grappled with using the same words that they did. It's so funny getting emails in our inbox. Yeah, saying why did you use different R's than the Leap? It's like, we're all friends. We mean the same thing. It's great. So yeah, I really look to the Leap in terms of their thought leadership. All their people are so great. On the YouTube channel, I dropped the People's Bailout link in there, so you folks can find it. I'm going to drop in the link for the Just Recovery site that was just launched. So on our website, you can find an explainer video about how the response to this crisis and how we build out of it connects to the Green New Deal and why we need a just recovery that puts us on the path towards longer term systemic change. And then there's also more information about, there's a webinar we did a couple of weeks ago that digs into the strategy of the moment that we're in. So like how we need to build power to win a just recovery. So you can watch that if you didn't get to see it. And then there's information on how to host a digital teach-in, basically a conversation with people in your community about what a just recovery is, and helping to really like build that vision around it. So if you want to host a teach-in in your community, it can either be something that's private for like your friends and neighbors, or if you're part of an organization and want to host a public teach-in, you can do that as well. You can just click to sign up to host a teach-in and see all the resources that are available to you, including like we're doing several times a week. I'm leading trainings, which is basically like small group support. You can meet other people who are hosting these conversations too, basically around how to like host a Zoom call and facilitate conversations within your community. So would really love to see folks who've watched this take the lead in terms of initiating those conversations within your own social circles if you haven't already yet, so that we can really build out the frame and make sure that we're inviting people in this moment where people are really in flux in terms of their positions that they hold on different issues. So yeah, all of those are on our website. And then the last thing I'll just say is the principles that I shared earlier are a reflection. So there's global 350 just recovery principles, but an emerging alliance of organizations have come together to massage them a little bit to make them reflect a little bit more of what's going on in Canada. And so that joint collaborative effort is going to be launching next week on the 25th. So follow, I know 350 and the Leap will both be sharing it. So if you're following them on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, you'll see it. And we would love for grassroots organizations to sign on as endorsers of the Just Recovery and to really look at the framework of a Just Recovery and reflect on it in terms of your own work. So that's all from me.
Excellent. Thank you both so much for joining us tonight. For those Ward 3 residents who are here who want to plug into the Ward 3 initiatives, just head over to my website at narinder.ca. Alternatively, on any of the social media platforms to get a sense of how to connect to the Yard Share in Ward 3 program. Again, an opportunity for you want to be a land lender or a land tender. So this is also about growing our skills and building our capacity to cultivate the resilience that we all deserve to rely on moving forward. And just want to say thank you again for joining us, staying connected, working with us and transferring platforms while we shifted in that technical difficulty. Stay connected to Maya, stay connected to Katie, stay connected to the LEAP, stay connected to 350. Go over to their social medias and follow them immediately. The immediate call to action is just go like their feeds and go kind of just let the information seep in, right? Not only is it
And
on
the just
point,
recovery principles.
and the just recovery principles, like not
Yeah.
only is it on point in terms of words, check out the imagery and just let it seep in. And I think tonight my goal really was about letting the imagery of the short video that we saw seep in. Take the time to be the dreamer. Take the time to reflect on what you deserve, what we all deserve moving forward out of this pandemic. Tap into the spirit of possibility and let our ignited collective spirit of community really carry us forward. Thank you, Ward 3ers. Thank you, Hamiltonians. Thank you to everybody who's joining us tonight. A reminder that our programming is shifting in June for our online content, so please stay tuned. The consistent things that are going to continue is Coffee with Your Counselor every Tuesday morning at 9:30 on Instagram Live and on Facebook Live. So it's an opportunity for me to hear directly from you about the issues that matter most, not only on a local level in our neighborhoods, but also what matters most in terms of our citywide decision making. Such a critical opportunity for us to engage in this conversation and stay connected, especially as Council is moving towards discussing what reopening and what recovery looks like. Your voice is necessary and needed, and I encourage you to log on. And if you have a neighbor that you know has great ideas or has content or has points that they want to share, encourage them to call the office line. I'm also making personalized phone calls during this time. It is a moment of hyper reconnecting. It's a moment of getting to know each other again. And it's a time for us to all lift up together. Next Wednesday, Ward 3 Wellness Wednesday will be facilitated with Dr. Giselle Griffith, an opportunity for all of us to kind of ground into our beings and into a well-being state so that we can continue this conversation moving forward. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Katie, so much for joining us. Thank you for your patience working through the tech stuff. And thank you so much for the work that you do in our communities. Good night, all.